Hello. Today we're going to talk about Wisconsin. So I spent the first half of my life living in Wisconsin, and one of the things that always stood out to me were the things about the state that the people from the state took pride in. Not having like a New York City or a Los Angeles, pride in Wisconsin always seemed to just kind of boil down to any time the state was mentioned in some capacity on the national scene. Perhaps this was the same in other Midwest states, but I don't know. But what I want to cover in this video are just some of the more memorable moments of Wisconsin pride I experienced in my life. Some of these are moments that made my own Wisconsin pride just plump up like a bratwurst at a Packers tailgate party. And some are moments I witnessed in other people that seem to make their own Wisconsin pride just plump up as well. So all of these happened in the late 80s and throughout the 1990s. And back then in like the pre-internet age, all I really had going for me was playing video games and watching sports. And outside of like the Green Bay Packers being mentioned in Tecmo's Super Bowl, Wisconsin hasn't ever really received any lip service within video games. Ever! Thus, almost all of these moments of pride stem from the world of sporting somehow. But I wouldn't steer you wrong. So trust me in that you really won't need to know anything about American sports to make sense of this video. Some of these might get kind of obscure. So if you're from Wisconsin and haven't heard of any of these moments, let me know in the comments. Or just reply with some other strange things that gave you a big old dose of Wisconsin pride. So with that said, let's rip off our shirts and get prideful. So let's begin in the world of cinema, which still kind of relates to sports. But this is a moment of my own personal pride. So our family always had this annual tradition of driving down to Milwaukee and then go seeing a series of baseball games for the Milwaukee Brewers at Milwaukee County Stadium. And as we were at the stadium watching these games live, my father always packed with him a radio so he could pick up Bob Uecker up in the old press booth above us and listen to his color commentary while we're sitting there watching the baseball game in the stadium. And thus, sitting at County Stadium with Bob Uecker blaring in my ear watching a baseball game is kind of one of those memorable childhood moments. So I always just assume that people who live in like New York City just take it for granted that their city is always like center stage and idolized in like cinema and TV and stuff. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Wisconsin generally isn't the setting in very many movies and TV shows. However, 1989 comes around and the movie Major League hits the theaters. And although the movie follows the plot of the Cleveland Indians, the setting was in County Stadium, and of course it featured Bob Uecker on the color commentary for the whole movie. So I didn't really care if that movie wasn't technically set in Wisconsin. It was set in Wisconsin in spirit. And whether people watching the movie knew it or not, probably not, I always took some kind of pride that like by watching this movie they were experiencing our annual family vacation. And that gave me a little bit of Wisconsin pride. So let's move on to some OPP and look at a different movie that is the opposite of sports. That's right, 1997 blockbuster, the boat movie Titanic.
I'll never let go.
So if you don't recall somehow, Titanic was a huge effing deal in the late 1990s. So huge that when we went to go see it in the theater, the shitty old theater next to the county market wasn't good enough for us. So we packed our family to the car and drove 90 miles to Green Bay to experience Titanic in this brand new concept of like stadium seating and a screen that's just huge. Oh, it was amazing. So here we are in this cutting edge theater watching the boat movie when we get to the first scene where Jack and Rose meet. A real tense scene where Rose is like contemplating killing herself and Jack walks in and goes, you ever been to Wisconsin once? Now, if the first time you've ever watched Titanic was not in Wisconsin, what I assume happened was everyone just sat there in the quiet, letting this dramatic scene unfold. However, sitting in the theater in Green Bay, Wisconsin, What happened was the entire crowd just erupted with Wisconsin proud and was like, yes! He said Wisconsin! Wisconsin's in a movie! Holy shit! So eventually the theater calmed down and we got to continue watching the boat movie. But of course, later on in the movie, when once again Jack Dawson says he's of the Chippewa Falls Dawsons, just again the theater just goes nuts because they said Wisconsin in a movie. Holy hell, it happened twice! And this is in Green Bay. But I can't imagine what happened 200 miles away in Chippewa Falls when this scene dropped. Like there was probably some hockey riots that went down and burned the city to the ground. Or maybe not, but simply mentioning Wisconsin and one of the biggest blockbusters of our time, that was some huge Wisconsin pride. Okay, let's move on to actual sports. And we're gonna begin with NASCAR. And if you just went, Alan Kowicki Polish victory lap! Well, I'm sorry to disappoint. This is about a different Wisconsin NASCARer with a little bit of a different legacy. I'm talking about the one and only driver whose mere mentioning of his name could possibly get this video demonetized, Dick Trickle. Now, most people take pride in their regional sports figures when they win a lot, like the aforementioned Alan Kowicki. But Dick Trickle finished his NASCAR career winning 0 of the 303 races he raced in. So why did I feel pride for Wisconsin's very own Dick Trickle? Well, because during this period, ESPN SportsCenter was going through its era where it was hosted by Keith Olbermann and Dan Patrick. And despite being a sports recap show, it was actually pretty funny. And at the time, I really enjoyed watching it just for the crossover of comedy, humor, and sports that were happening. And the thing about this era of the show is that every time they reported on a NASCAR race, no matter where Dick Trickle finished, they made sure to mention it. If he crashed and didn't make it, Dick Trickle did not finish. He got 43rd, Dick Trickle finished 43rd. All these good drivers like the Dale Earnhardts and the Jeff Gordons of the world, they only got their name called when they'd win. But Wisconsin's very own Dick Trickle, every time, no matter what, it was amazing, and that's the kind of weird stuff that gave me pride in my state. So moving on, let's talk about the Green Bay Packers. I know, oh my god, this isn't about all the Super Bowls they ended up eventually winning. This is my own personal Green Bay Packer pride story. It takes place sometime between 1992 when Don Mikowski got injured and some kid without the proper amount of human intestines took over as quarterback, and when that less intestine-filled man eventually took him to the Super Bowl a couple years later. And this is still the period when I would let myself get led to Catholic church every Sunday because that's what you do or grandma will kill you. And of all those years and all those sermons, there is exactly one that I remember. And I wouldn't even go so far as to calling it a sermon, to be honest. At some point during the Green Bay Packers' rise to success, our local Catholic preacher kinda got a bug up his ass about it and the congregation in general. So one fine Sunday, instead of a usual sermon, he used the entire time to just vent and yell at everyone sitting there about everything he thought was going wrong with the church. And one big point that he made was that people were paying more attention to the Green Bay Packers than they were to God and Jesus. Wow! Our sports team, who was a few years earlier absolute dog water, is now so freaking popular that the Catholic Church is getting jealous of their popularity and is making demands that we realign what we value in our lives. I think I felt more pride for our great state at that moment than when the Packers finally eventually brought the Lambeau Trophy back to Lambeau Field. Oh, it was intense. Okay, so before the Green Bay Packers pissed off God, a different Wisconsin football team found some success. Of course, I'm talking about the Wisconsin Badgers college football team and their 1994 Rose Bowl victory. Hail Bucky. So this win in itself was a huge boost in pride for Wisconsinites all around the world. As evidenced by that, you couldn't go anywhere without not being able to identify the Wisconsin tourists because they get off the bus wearing a Wisconsin Badgers 1994 Rose Bowl victory t-shirt or sweater every time. But the part of this story that I remember most and want to cover isn't the huge pride bubble from them winning the game, but rather the disgusting disgrace committed by commentator Bob Grisa by referring to the Wisconsin Badgers as the Wesconsin Badgers.
Wisconsin is big and strong.
So here's all of Wisconsin just amped up and high on Wisconsin pride as their team is on primetime TV sports, and this journalist just sits there the entire game and says Wisconsin wrong every single time. Now, you might just think this is some little nitpicky thing that only I remember, but oh no. People were mad. Look at like all these news clippings I found of people writing in just bitching about this guy saying Wesconsin instead of Wisconsin. Look at this one right here, even like implies like if you see the guy, mildly choke him to remind him how to say Wisconsin. Oh my god. And the biggest attack against the Wisconsin Badgers seemed to have been led by a Wisconsin legislator, Snarlin' Marlin Schneider. Multiple newspapers picked up an article about a letter he apparently wrote, ABC and Bob Grisa, about how there's only 6 words in my dictionary that starts with WES, and none of them are Wisconsin. And enough is enough with newscasters not knowing how to pronounce such easy Wisconsin names like Oconomowoc and Prairie du Chien. And for what it's worth, that was not a Wisconsin accent. Whatever. But ultimately, according to other articles I found, the ABC did reply apologizing for the announcer's audacity to not say the name 100% correct, and that they did tell him beforehand he was pronouncing it wrong, but his accent simply didn't allow him to say it correctly. But they will keep reminding him for the future. And I like that this Pat Sims character goes ahead and uses their apology to get one little dig into Indiana right here. Don't with Wisconsin pride in any capacity. You hear that? All you people out there with different accents, you will get torn apart by our journalists. So now let's move on to boxing of all things for another strange moment that personally gave me some little electrical shocks of Wisconsin pride when this happened back in 1993. So I'm watching SportsCenter like I often do, and there's this story about a heavyweight boxing title fight where one of the people fighting it wasn't supposed to be fighting it. The guy who was supposed to be fighting the fight got cold feet, and instead of just canceling the match, they found another heavyweight fighter who had been drinking in the audience and just asked him to fight. So in goes a little tipsy Tim Tomashek from Green Bay, Wisconsin, to get his ass whooped by this heavyweight prize fighter. And it led to some really interesting footage that you don't see in many boxing matches. Okay, so the guys from Wisconsin, cool. But it really wasn't until a few weeks later that my Wisconsin pride strings, boom, got their chords strung. See, this odd fight managed to earn Tim Tomashek a trip out to New York City to go do an interview on David Letterman's late night show.
Well, our next guest spends most of his time working at the Shopko in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Now some regular guy from Wisconsin is getting to be on David Letterman. Oh my God, this is exciting. And jeepers from showing up in a Shopko shirt.
And I see you have your Shopko shirt on.
Yes, I'm plugging it a little bit.
Well, it's funny because the girls usually go nuts for a guy in a Shopko shirt.
To excessively using the term jeepers.
Jeepers.
One word jeepers and I'm gonna have to take away a point.
And like trying to like spin it and interview David Letterman instead.
Can I ask you one more question, please?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. Did you live on Delaware Street in Indianapolis?
No, I didn't. I lived on Indianola.
God dang, that guy took me $5.
The interview was absolutely amazing. And like this happened during the heyday of the Chris Farley era of Saturday Night Live. And like if Saturday Night Live that week had taken this exact interview and redone it word for word as a skit with Chris Farley playing the role of Tim Tomashek, it would have probably been like one of those legendary skits that everyone remembered for some reason. It was just that perfect. I'll put a link to the full episode in the video so you can watch this interview if you are completely unaware of this little cultural phenomenon in 1993. It's amazing and worth it. But jeepers, just combining like all the Wisconsinisms and like having it feel like it was out of Saturday Night Live, which is like my most favorite influential show at the time, and putting it on David Letterman, which is another show that I watched all the time and absolutely loved. That was something about Wisconsin to be proud of in my little head, and oh boy. And finally, since I just mentioned him, I'm gonna give the last blast of 1990s Wisconsin pride to Chris Farley himself. I don't really feel I need to go too deep into why he's important because he's probably the least obscure thing in this video, and there's probably already hundreds of other videos about his career you can go check out if you're more interested. But for me, a young boy who just really loved offbeat comedy, and here's this juggernaut of the genre on Saturday Night Live every weekend, knowing that he was from Wisconsin just filled me with like at least 2 throbbing bratwursts of Wisconsin pride every week. Bum 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 bum. Bratwursts don't beat like hearts. And that's my weird little list of great moments in Wisconsin pride that I remember. And if now you're itching for some more Wisconsin content, I suggest hitting this video up here about Ashland, Wisconsin and its weird little tie-in with the history of fine art photography. Guaranteed no sports. Unless there are sports, I don't remember.